The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically critical maritime choke points in the global energy system, functioning as a narrow passage through which a massive portion of the world's petroleum supply is transported every single day, connecting the oil-rich Persian Gulf region, including countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates, to global markets across Asia, Europe, and North America, and due to this unique geographic and economic position, approximately one-fifth of the world's total oil consumption, which translates to nearly 17 to 20 million barrels per day, passes through this narrow channel, meaning that any disruption, blockage, or military closure of this route would immediately create a severe imbalance between global oil supply and demand, triggering a cascade of economic, political, and social consequences that would extend far beyond the Middle East and affect virtually every country on Earth, particularly those that are heavily dependent on imported energy resources. When the strait is functioning normally, oil tankers move continuously in both directions, ensuring stable supply chains, predictable pricing, and relatively manageable energy costs for industries and consumers. But in the event of a closure, whether due to war, naval blockade, or military escalation involving the United States and Iran, the immediate effect would be a dramatic reduction in available oil in the international market, because exporters in the Gulf region would be unable to ship their oil efficiently. And while some countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have limited alternative pipeline routes that bypass the strait, these routes are insufficient to handle the full volume of exports, meaning that a large percentage of global oil supply would effectively be cut off or delayed, leading to what economists call a supply shock, which occurs when the availability of a critical commodity suddenly decreases while demand remains constant or even increases, thereby pushing prices upward at a rapid and often uncontrollable pace. As a result of this supply shock, global crude oil prices, benchmarked by indices such as Brent crude, would surge sharply, potentially rising from typical levels of $70–90 per barrel to $120, $150, or even higher in extreme scenarios. And because petrol gasoline prices are directly linked to crude oil costs, consumers around the world would experience immediate increases at fuel stations, with prices rising not only due to higher raw material costs but also due to increased transportation expenses, insurance premiums for shipping through conflict zones, and speculative trading in energy markets, all of which amplify volatility and uncertainty. In practical terms, this means that ordinary people would see the price of petrol increase significantly within days or even hours of a closure announcement, with countries that rely heavily on imported oil, such as Pakistan, India, Japan, and China, being among the hardest hit, because they lack sufficient domestic production to offset the supply disruption, whereas countries like the United States, which has significant domestic oil production due to shale extraction, would still experience price increases but may be somewhat buffered compared to fully import-dependent economies. However, even in oil-producing nations, global market integration ensures that local prices are influenced by international trends, so no country remains completely immune to the effects of such a crisis. Beyond the immediate spike in petrol prices, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would also lead to a sharp increase in shipping and logistics costs, as tanker routes would either be halted or rerouted through longer, less efficient pathways, increasing fuel consumption and delivery times, while insurance companies would raise premiums dramatically due to the heightened risk of attacks, mines, or naval confrontations in the region, thereby compounding the overall cost of transporting oil and refined products. And these additional costs would inevitably be passed down the supply chain to consumers, contributing to broader inflationary pressures across the global economy. This inflationary effect is particularly significant because fuel is a foundational input for almost all economic activities, including transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, and electricity generation, meaning that when petrol prices rise, the cost of producing and delivering goods also increases, leading to higher prices for food, clothing, electronics, and virtually all consumer products, thereby reducing purchasing power and potentially lowering living standards, especially in developing countries where income levels are already constrained and a large portion of household expenditure is devoted to basic necessities. In the case of Pakistan, for instance, a sharp increase in petrol prices would not only raise transportation costs but also affect electricity generation, as many power plants rely on imported fuels, leading to higher electricity tariffs and increased load-shedding risks, which in turn would disrupt industrial productivity and economic growth, while also placing additional strain on government budgets due to the need for subsidies or price controls to protect vulnerable populations. Similarly, in India, rising fuel prices would contribute to inflation in food and transportation sectors, potentially prompting policy responses such as tax reductions or subsidies, which could strain public finances, while in China, higher energy costs could impact manufacturing competitiveness and export dynamics, given the country's role as a global production hub. Japan, being highly dependent on imported energy, would likely face significant challenges in maintaining stable energy supplies, potentially drawing on strategic petroleum reserves to mitigate short-term shortages, while European countries would experience rising fuel and heating costs, particularly in nations that are already dealing with energy security challenges, and governments across the European Union might implement measures such as fuel tax reductions, subsidies, or strategic reserve releases to stabilize markets. In the United States, although domestic production provides some resilience, consumers would still face higher gasoline prices due to global market linkages, and political pressure would likely increase on policymakers to release strategic reserves, adjust regulations, or engage diplomatically to de-escalate tensions in the region. Another critical aspect of a Strait of Hormuz closure is its potential to trigger financial market volatility, as investors react to uncertainty and rising costs by shifting assets, which could lead to stock market declines, currency fluctuations, and increased risk premiums, particularly in emerging markets, while energy companies might see short-term gains due to higher prices but also face operational risks associated with supply disruptions and geopolitical instability. Over a longer time horizon, a sustained closure could accelerate structural changes in the global energy system, encouraging countries to diversify their energy sources, invest in renewable energy technologies, and reduce dependence on oil imports, but such transitions require time, investment, and infrastructure development, meaning that in the short term, the world would remain highly vulnerable to supply shocks originating from critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. In extreme scenarios where the closure persists for several months, governments might implement emergency measures such as fuel rationing, restrictions on non-essential travel, and prioritization of fuel allocation for critical sectors like healthcare, defense, and food supply chains, while international organizations and alliances could coordinate responses to stabilize markets and ensure minimum supply levels. But despite these efforts, the economic impact would likely include reduced growth rates, increased unemployment, and heightened social tensions in affected regions. Historically, similar disruptions in oil supply, such as the 1970s oil crisis, have demonstrated how quickly energy shortages can translate into widespread economic hardship, and while modern economies are somewhat more diversified and resilient, the fundamental dependence on oil for transportation and industry means that a major disruption in supply would still have profound consequences. In summary, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would represent a critical shock to the global energy system, leading to immediate and significant increases in petrol prices worldwide, severe supply constraints, rising inflation, economic slowdown, and potential geopolitical escalation, with the magnitude of the impact depending on the duration of the closure, the availability of alternative supply routes, and the effectiveness of policy responses by governments and international institutions. But regardless of these variables, the central conclusion remains that the Strait of Hormuz is a vital artery of the global economy, and any disruption to its operation has far-reaching implications for energy security, economic stability, and the daily lives of billions of people around the world.